Welcome back, everyone. Just a reminder that we invite your participation during this conference. Please feel free to share your thoughts and ask your questions during this session through the chat and Q&A boxes. Speaker bios are still under the Speakers tab on the menu in the top left-hand corner of the conference website. If you have any technical difficulties, and this information will be included in the chat, please email emsupport@advancednetlabs.org or click on the support bubble. It's that black icon in the lower right-hand corner of your conference website. Share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag CDCUCon2021 to track and continue the discussion. Again, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Inclusiv CDCUs and on LinkedIn at Inclusiv. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to present our Master of Ceremonies, Pablo De Filippi.
Thank you, Jules. Before we begin this session, and it's going to be an amazing session, I'd like us to listen to NCUA board member Rodney Hood, whose remarks will provide a terrific framework for the conversation we're about to have. As you all know, board member Hood has been a tireless champion promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within the credit union industry. He cares about MDIs and CDFIs and believes, like we do here at Inclusiv, that credit unions are an important part of the solution to bring affordable, responsible, and sustainable financial products for all. Let's start the video.
Hello, Inclusiv. This is Rodney Hood, board member of the National Credit Union Administration. I am delighted to bring you greetings today as you all convene for your 2021 conference. I certainly look forward to the time when we can all get together in person. So perhaps next year, and I think Puerto Rico. But until then, do know that I am committed, just as I have been from the moment I came to the board 2 years ago, to supporting financial inclusion. If there's any organization that I work with on a day-to-day basis who cares about this matter, it is certainly all of you at Inclusiv. I'd like to applaud you for the work that you all do each and every day to support things such as subordinated debt, secondary capital, giving strength to our low-income designated credit unions, our CDFIs, and our MDIs. This is the ecosystem of folks who are all committed, as I am, to addressing a lot of the intractable issues that we see play out through a lot of our communities of color. I know that we live in a society today where more than 40% of American households cannot obtain $400 in the event of an emergency. I believe that by working together with you, we can provide small dollar loans to these vulnerable communities. I applaud the work that you do by way of outreach and advocacy. And just as you're pursuing those activities, I do so in my work as a financial regulator. As you all know, I believe that regulation needs to be effective but not excessive. And I hope that that mission bodes well with you all, because through giving you the regulatory flexibility and empowerment that you all need, I think it gives you greater tools and opportunities to better serve your member owners and also to help our MDIs, our CDFIs, and LIQs all strive to reach their full potential. When I talk about financial inclusion as a civil rights issue, I believe that we can address those issues by, one, the new Access initiative that we launched last year at NCUA. That stands for Advancing Communities Through Credit, Education, Stability, and Support. Through Access, we're going to focus on providing small dollar lending opportunities, focusing on helping strengthen MDIs and providing them with the tools that they need to succeed, such as mentoring or grants through our Community Development Revolving Loan Fund. I also believe that it's important that we support small businesses. I was very proud of the fact that credit unions provided more than 300,000 Paycheck Protection Program loans. And a lot of those loans, you all, were made by many of your members in Inclusiv. I am certainly proud of the fact that we had one MDI out of Mississippi make 5,000 PPP loans, and that's just one example. So with my Access initiative, we want to continue to see that trend of providing entrepreneurs with the capital they need to strengthen the economy and create sustainable jobs. Another piece of the Access Initiative extends to supplier diversity. So yes, let's continue to make loans to minority entrepreneurs, but let's also make sure that we're supporting those minority entrepreneurs by buying their goods and services, whether it be for equipment, accounting services, legal services. Let's broaden the sphere of tools and products that we're buying from supplier diverse candidates. For instance, we at NCUA, more than 40% of our spend is now to diverse suppliers. So it's a goal that I look forward to even continuing to increase over my remaining time here on the board. So as you can see, access is one initiative that I think that you will care about. Another piece is my commitment to fintech. Financial technology, I think, can really help our small institutions, our CDFIs, our MDIs, all continue to serve their members. Technology can be an accelerant for helping look for opportunities to reach millennials. I love the fact that fintech tools today are providing financial coaching, financial well-being, financial literacy, but at the same time, they're helping take out some of the pain points that may exist in some of our old ways of thinking and providing new opportunities to reach our member owners in the ways in which they wish to be served, such as digital platforms, such as remote deposit capture. So I really am excited about fintech, and I'm excited about our new office that we will soon be launching called the Office of Innovation and Access. So I don't believe in innovating just because it's the cool thing to do these days. I believe that through proper and strategic deployment of innovation can come greater access. So that's why at NCUA, it will be called the Office of Innovation and Access. And it's something I think that you all at Inclusiv can help us as we not only recruit talent for that new department, but to also bring us ideas of how we can better use technology to reach and serve underserved communities. So in closing, I certainly believe in the great work that you all are doing at Inclusiv. I want you to know that I want to continue to give you my support, continue to give you all of the tools that you need in your regulatory toolbox so that you can, again, help improve the lives of the millions of hardworking people that we have throughout the United States, and especially those 1/3 of members of credit unions. That's right, credit unions now serve 1/3 of American households. So I'm counting on you to assist me in providing them with opportunities for access to affordable financial services, the affordable mortgages they need to provide sustainable home ownership, the affordable car loans they need to go to and from work, and those affordable business loans so that they can have thriving, sustainable businesses that grow their economy. So with that, Inclusiv, bless you. Thank you for the work you're doing, and may God bless you all and your families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood, for sharing your vision and for your leadership. We look forward to working more closely with you through your Access initiative and with other initiatives that you are rolling out at NCUA. Like you, I do believe that fintech is a solution, but it's more than a tool. I don't think that we will ever be able to replace technology when it comes to the face-to-face experience that is so important to build trust in low-income and minority communities. This panel is going to talk precisely about that, right? How do we collectively, because there's not just one solution or just one sector that can solve these issues around inclusion, but I do believe that we have collectively an opportunity to address these systemic challenges. So I'm thrilled to facilitate this session and incredibly honored to have these incredible and inspiring panelists with me. Again, I will not read their bios, but will share a couple of highlights with you all. Let's start with Dr. Atia Martin. She's the CEO of All Aces, and she's been a leading force in the DEI conversation at the national level, helping the private sector understand the true meaning of building an inclusive and equitable business model. Ms. Renee Satterwhite, President and CEO of the African American Credit Union Coalition. She needs no more introduction, but she is really a force of nature in this space. She's a friend and a partner who challenges and encourages all to work together. Renee, you're an inspiration to all of us, and thank you for doing what you do. And lastly, we have Sarah Willis from the JP Morgan Chase Foundation, who has been a long partner of Inclusiv and CDFIs. SAT is deeply committed to financial inclusion and to helping improve the financial health of low-income consumers. So let's get the conversation going. I'll ask the first question, and then please respond in the order I introduce you. Please talk about your organization's efforts to promote and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within the financial services industry.
Thank you so much for that, Pablo. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this amazing conversation and much needed conversation. And so one of the things that I think I will first apologize for is I am not super sexy like everyone else with the background. And so I'm the odd person out on this one, my apologies. But that said, one of the big things that we do at All Aces Inc. is work with organizations and from a mission-based, values-based perspective. So for us, our mission really is about activating consciousness, catalyzing critical thinking, and really making sure that we're transforming the capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience in organizations. And so our focus really does start with racial equity in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for that, we really help to organizations to really understand how to expand their knowledge, skills, and tools, as well as process for how they engage with their staff, with external stakeholders, in order to make critical decisions about the key challenges that are barriers for people of color in the organization or BIPOC people in the organization, but that are also reflective of challenges other folks in the organization are struggling with. The challenge with a lot of this work is much of the dysfunction in organizations disproportionately impacts BIPOC people in the organization and outside the organization. And so as we think about the work that we've done, we have some clients who are on the international level who do financial services, and some folks who do it nationally, and some folks who do it regionally. And so it's really been interesting, some of the nuances around policy considerations, and then other pieces are more about the internal organizational development and operations, which is consistent across all organizations, regardless of which industry they're in. There are certain patterns that exist in every organization in terms of the dysfunction and toxicity that perpetuates racial inequities and other forms of oppression and social injustices. So thank you for the question, and I will pass it along to Renee.
Thank you, Doc. I appreciate that. And hello, everybody out there. Pablo, thank you so much for the introduction. And I am so impressed that you decided to be here with the ladies, because the ladies rock. So thank you for that. We figured, no, we didn't need another man. You are the godfather, my friend. You are the godfather. Mi amigo. So thank you so much. ACC is doing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff. I cannot believe that this year has flown by the way that it has. The Commitment to Change, Credit Unions Unite Against Racism initiative has just really taken off throughout the industry. Can you just imagine in the credit union space that all of the credit union leagues of the credit union movement belong to ACC? Oh my gosh, 2 years ago, only 5 did. Credit Unions Unite Against Racism, they jumped on the bandwagon. I am so thrilled about that. The programs that have come out of this initiative are as follows, and I wrote them down because I don't want to miss them. There's so many. We became more collaborative with Inclusiv, NowCup, and Coopera, and the DEI Collective. We all decided that we had to really buckle down and get in there together and work things out and make sure that we're supporting one another and really bringing that large initiative together. We are stronger, and we love that. Town hall meetings, ACC conducted those across the country, offering a safe space for people to have conversations about history, about discrimination, marginalized human beings. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And so from the lowest person on the corporate ladder to the top person of the corporate ladder, we're having these exchanges and making sure that people generally felt like they were needed and heard. And that's so important in this space. Our cross-cultural exchange program, which was an extraordinary program that paired up executives around the country, and shout out to my strategic planning, my planning committee. They were great. John Bissell of Greylock Federal Credit Union, Tony Hernandez of Defense Council, Credit Unions, Defense Credit Union Council, and Grace Sanchez, of course, our Latino Community Engagement Manager at ACC, along with Jill Nowacki and Dan McHugh at Alaska Federal USA Credit Union. Those group of individuals paired up these amazing 44 professionals around the country, and they exchanged ideas for 90 days and got to know each other better. So that initiative is really moving forward, and we're having a conversation with Juan Fernandez tomorrow night about that. Our one-to-one woman mentorship program, Shelly Mitchell from NASCIS brought that to us, and that paired up, look at this, check this out, that paired up white women with up-and-coming young Black women. It was phenomenal. It was a month-long mentorship program, and it was amazing. Titans in the credit union industry, white women who are making a difference, who are making things happen, were paired up with young Black women, and I think that they have made relationships that are going to last their career long and probably also their lifetime. We have the most amazing thing, the DEI Leadership Academy for Financial Professionals. Oh my goodness. Finally, something where we can sink our teeth into in the credit union industry. And Emma Hayes leads that as our Chief Diversity Officer, with Michelle Neron as a Yale professor as our Dean. And then last but not least, Board Ready, a program. This is the most community impact that ACC has done. It is a 501c3 nonprofit board governance training program. Imagine that. If people of color were to get interested in learning how to be a board of director for a 501c3 nonprofit, that's where the stuff is happening in community. So we were excited about rolling that out. And then the 8th cooperative principle, continue to endorse that, which Maurice Smith has penned, along with DEItalks.com. So I could go on forever, and I won't. I'll stop, and I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Renee. Really excited to hear about your initiatives. And Dr. Martin, I'm envious of your bookshelf, so you're the cool one. But really, Pablo, Inclusiv, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on this conversation. As Pablo said, I'm representing JP Morgan Chase, but I sit within corporate responsibility, leading our philanthropic portfolio of financial health initiatives, and have a lot of experience in fintech, so look forward to digging into that as well. I thought I would spend just a minute going into one particular commitment that the firm made last year around racial equity specifically. It was $30 billion in new investments over the next 5 years, and really designed to, in cooperation with many of our community partners, including Inclusiv, to address systemic barriers that Black and Latinx communities face in terms of economic outcomes, building their own financial security, financial health, whether it's their individual, community, or family outcomes. So the investments over the next 5 years are tagged very intentionally to lending, to equity, to direct investments. $2 billion is philanthropy, which we clearly see an important role in that, playing and catalyzing change and improving innovation. But really, there's 4 specific areas that we're focused on addressing, given our scale across the country. One was expanding affordable homeownership and housing in general, growing Black and Latinx-owned businesses. The piece of the pie that I've really been working closely with is improving access to basic banking accounts, but also financial health outcomes, which is really where the magic happens, as well as accelerating our own investments in our employee base, which is quite large across the country in 15 different cities. One of the things that we've noticed about this is, sure, you can talk about $30 billion, that's a very sizable number, but I would argue what's important about the commitment is actually how it's changing the way we work as a company internally. We're thinking about things a little bit differently, whether that's our lending practices, our banking products and services. How are we reaching new communities in a way that meets their needs, that speaks their language, that is accessible and appropriate, and really an emphasis on the outcomes that we can also track side by side with some traditional business KPIs. And the other thing that I would say we're doing, which is transforming the firm, is national is not a place, of course. So this is a national commitment, but taking this and understanding from community partners, data, census data, et cetera, research partners, and understanding in particular neighborhoods, how might we adapt these commitments, what's needed in more communities than not, and really making sure we're thinking about deposits, but also lending, also that entire holistic suite of financial services and products. I would be remiss not to mention Inclusiv, because we're at the Inclusiv conference, as a key financial health partner of ours for, as Pablo said, many, many years. When COVID hit and last year, when the country continues to experience racial unrest, we really turned to the Inclusiv network to say, how can we support some of these perhaps under-resourced MDI, CDFIs, community development credit unions that might not be eligible for national programs. They might not be getting the same resourcing. How can we step in? So we did that last year and continue planning on continuing to support this really amazing network of innovators. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And the investments that you're talking about went to our Resilience Fund that has been providing grants to minority credit unions throughout the country. So we really appreciate that. Just looking back at your responses, clearly we're in this phase of building, a framework for our own organizations to be more inclusive, but at the same time to project that inclusion, that DEI framework into a more external racial equity conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, what we want is not only transform our organizations because we see that imperative, but at the end of the day, what we want is to make sure that we're connecting with these communities that have been left behind for, decades or maybe forever. And that leads me to the second question here. And this question is dear to me because I came to this country as an immigrant, and it took me a while to have a loan, to be able to access a loan or a credit card. What really blew my mind was the fact that that wasn't just a challenge for immigrants, that this has been a challenge for many, many people, right? I mean, we look at the stats and we look at millions of people who are unbanked or underbanked. So this is the question. If the US has one of the most sophisticated financial systems in the world, why is it that many people are still systematically left behind? And that's a trend that we have seen with the pandemic, more people, left behind and more people with less ability to access some of these subsidies that have been made available. So the question is, what can be done to reverse this and give people access to the tools they need to achieve financial security?
Thank you so much for that, Pablo. And I'll begin by saying that sophistication does not guarantee equity, right? Yes. They're not mutually exclusive, but they don't necessarily come together by default. The only way to make sure that our financial systems are equitable is by being intentional, which we have not been, right? We've been uncomfortable with even having the conversation about the differences in the experiences people are having. And because we don't even have that conversation, we actually never get to the point you made, Pablo, which is it's harder for marginalized identities to navigate these systems and access these systems. There's a long history of policies and practices and kind of society cultures that have influenced that access and what we see today. And we also know that sits on top of the problems that the system actually has, right? And so that means that only some people can access it with ease, for them with ease, because they have the extra resources to figure it all out, whereas the rest of us are trying to figure it out by ourselves. And it's through partnerships, through relationships, through organizations who are being intentional about having eyes wide open, mirrors facing themselves, and looking in that mirror to see what are we doing to perpetuate these inequities? What can we be doing differently? And the caution I want to place here is owning responsibility does not mean that you're owning the fault for the problem that we're all facing. Right. And that's usually what gets conflated. And then what people do is use the fact that it's not their fault to absolve responsibility for the fact that it is our reality that we're all dealing with and we have to do something about it. Otherwise, we're culpable. We're part of the problem. Inaction is an action. And so as we think about that, plus the power of ideas, right? The power of ideas that support racism and other forms of oppression, they are very powerful. There's the dragon again, y'all, sorry. But they reinforce these ideas about who white people are supposed to be, about who Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islanders, all these different people are supposed to be, what we should expect from them, who deserves what, who cares about what or doesn't care. And all of those assumptions influence not just how we think, whether we believe them consciously or not, doesn't matter. We get exposed to those ideas so often that they influence very heavily how we make decisions, how we act, how we behave. And in organizations, it influences the policies, the programs, the cultures that we set up that ultimately create these experiences for our employees, experiences in communities. And the opportunity that we have is that it doesn't have to be that way. If we can get out of our own way, if we can expand our landscape of action by expanding our knowledge, our understanding of what is the problem we're actually trying to solve for. It's not that BIPOC people are somehow by default flawed, or that they don't know how to manage money. There are some things that folks don't know, but people who are low income, people who are BIPOC, which aren't always the same. There are some BIPOC folks, many folks who are middle class and upper class. But this idea that people don't know how to manage their money and that's why they're in those situations is flawed. I know poor people. I grew up poor, and my mother was amazing at managing money. she was the best at it. And so as we think about what are some of the flawed ideas that are influencing what we think people should or should not have, that's an important part of this. And being able to take the time to really learn by the data in our organizations and outside our organizations of what's really happening and how people are really being impacted so that we can actually solve for the real problem and not what we think the problem is.
Atia, that's phenomenal. And speaks to some of the myths about, being low income. You're right. There's this notion that people don't know how to manage money, but it's hard to manage, very limited resources. And when you're poor, things become more expensive. We always say here at Inclusiv that, people can afford to be poor. It's such a incredible reality, right? I mean, people can afford to be poor. So how do we, and we keep kind of blaming people for being poor, for not having the resources, and that is not the way out. So thank you for sharing your perspective about this. Really appreciate it. Renee, your turn.
Dr. Martin, that was so eloquent. I'm just going to say amen, girl. Amen, amen, amen. I love talking to educated women and educated men because you give a perspective that is so on point. Well, in conversation with Dr. Valerie Myers this morning, she was saying some of that similar stuff. The systematic is the problem. We're trying to fix a problem without going to the root. So unless we go to the root of the systematic racism and the inequities there, then we can't fix the problem. We have to be open to, and I love the word intentional. I'm saying it all the time. You have to be intentional in your walk, your DEI walk. And so what that looks like is making sure that you don't take it personally, that you see it as an objective opportunity to make things better, to make things different. One of the ways to do that, and when you have a background, I don't want to mess it up. ACUC has a commitment to change credit card. That credit card is designed to help marginalized human beings instead of being so many times we don't have people who can get credit, have access to credit. So again, it's not like we don't know how to manage our money. We just don't have any money to manage. So how can we get that money? How can we get equitable? I really don't have any more to add. Dr. Martin did a great job. I will concur with be intentional and honest about where you are. And if you're someone with influence like Sarah, you have a deep pocket where you can help these communities look outside of the box. You can't look at the people who look like you to make the same decisions, because you'll be in the same I don't want to call that mess. We'll be in the same situation. So that's what I have to offer. Sarah?
Yeah, this is a tough act to follow. And I think between the two of you, we know your next book title, right? Sophistication does not guarantee equity. I love that. And I'll add another sort of perspective perhaps to that same sentiment, which is if we have sophisticated financial systems, and even if we do assume 100% access, right? That's a great bar to hold ourselves to. But I would argue we could go even beyond that, right? When thinking about how are we actually helping folks achieve financial security or short-term financial security as a baseline, but let's not stop there. Let's think about the ultimate wealth pathway to asset building, wealth building, et cetera. That is really going to get at some of those historic systemic barriers that we've all acknowledged. The other thing that I like to think about is financial services, and perhaps ironic coming from a bank, are a means to an end in terms of getting you to where you want to go in life, achieving your goals, helping you plan. So a couple things that I would call out is we have to also be aware of rising housing costs, stagnant wages, some of the historic discrimination that the system has had, and really a weakening social safety net as the context. And then beyond that, with a sophisticated financial system that does reach all, how are other ways that we can show up with a new light on financial health? And I think, Dr. Martin, you said something that really stuck with me, which was, we tend to be reliant on this idea that education will get us out of this, and I'll use the word mess, Renee, but yes, this challenge that we face. And I'm actively using my voice and platform to say, we cannot continue blaming individuals for their economic circumstances. We should be providing actionable information alongside financial products and services. I'm a huge component of financial coaching, of course, and we've also supported Inclusiv's work around that. But I think the emphasis has to shift on ensuring those products and services are appropriate, affordable, accessible, and that they're also transparent and consumers can easily understand them. I think we've scratched our heads at times when looking at disclosures, or, I recently purchased a house for the first time in my life, and that was an experience, right? And I'm taking that lesson away to understand how do we make this system just much more consumer friendly and consumer centric. And I think that will also go a long way in reversing perhaps the inequities that we see.
Yes, Sarah, that's a great point about, really looking at financial products as tools. And I think that that's one of the challenges around just the mindset of who should have access to these products. These are real tools without which you can't really function in society. Renee, you showed that credit card. Gosh, without a credit card, you cannot do anything in today's, society, right? I mean, anything you do, you have to have some sort of plastic in your wallet. So really thinking, how do we make these tools truly available? And I love, Sarah, what you said about making sure that these products are easy to use and they're transparent, because some of the distrust, and this is a big issue in low income and minority communities, is that the financial system has proven over and over that they're not to be trusted, right? So how do we reverse that perception? And that happens even with, even with credit unions that may be well-intentioned and going to a community where they're new to that community, you have to overcome that perception that financial institutions are not to be trusted. They're not there to help you. They're there to take from you. And one example of this is the credit union that I ran in New York City many years ago, the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union. That credit union actually came about because of a failure of a bank to serve an entire community in New York City. We're talking about 2 miles away from Wall Street, right, or less. So let's think about what happens in rural communities, what happens in the deep South, where, banks don't really exist, or even credit unions are hard to find. And that takes us into the third question, which is, how do we build a more inclusive financial system? Can we transform this financial system that hasn't been really concerned with this reality? Do we need more policies and regulations? Or do we need to start all over again? Are fintechs, the silver bullet that we want to believe they are? There's talks about, public banks. There are talks about transforming the postal office into some sort of banking or financial institution. So in your opinion, what can we do? Should we just scratch everything and start anew, or can we repurpose?
In an ideal world, we'd be able to start anew. However, we don't live in an ideal world. And so in reality, I think what we have to do many things. And I know everyone wants a silver bullet. You want the answer, like what's the easy button? How do I hit it to just make it all work? And the reality is it's just not, that doesn't respect the complexity of reality. And so, so at a policy and regulations level, there's a whole layer of work that needs to be done, right? And I think a tool, instead of going into the weeds and details of policies that need and regulations that need to be changed, what I will recommend is there's a tool that has been really powerful in looking at policies and regulations that is oftentimes a lot of people just don't know about, and it is called targeted universalism. It's this idea that, yes, I know we want to have universal policies, universal regulations that apply to everyone. And we also know that when we're not intentional, to build on Renee's favorite word, right? When we're not intentional about how we are looking at the data, about what the data is telling us about the potential inequities that already exist, and how things that we're proposing might be worsening those inequities, how there may be barriers that are in place that are hard to see unless you actually take a critical lens to them. And so this idea of really looking at policies in a way that we understand that there's a big picture that has to apply to everyone, and that we're not afraid to look at what's in the details, because the devil's in the details, and inequities oftentimes get lost in the averages, right? In the sums of things. And it's by peeling those layers back to see, well, how is this impacting communities of color? How is this impacting poor communities and across the country? And where are there opportunities for us to reduce or remove the barriers for folks to be able to access certain things? But it's not just about access. It's also about being a part of decision-making processes. How do we make sure that folks who are impacted are a part of decision-making processes? How do we make sure that when we're implementing, that people are a part of helping to decide whether or not that thing actually worked or didn't, right? We oftentimes come up with our own metrics and say, hey, this is successful because we said it was successful, because we came up with these metrics and so it worked. When in reality, people on the ground would not agree with you. And so being able to connect those dots across the policy spectrum, as I said, policy isn't enough for organizations, that organizations in the financial services industry are able to take a look in that mirror, like I mentioned before. And I want to be specific about something that was mentioned earlier, that there's this whole historical context. And I don't want people to think that this stuff only happens in the past. This stuff happens today, like now, right? And it's not because everyone's a bad person and everyone's evil. It's because we've been doing things for a certain way for so long. And the way that those things started, they were created inequitably. They were created in ways that were meant to exclude people. And we've built on top of all of those things in our organizations and policies and regulations without understanding and fully integrating that understanding of that historical context and that in how it's showing up today. In how we're running our organizations, in the products and services we're offering, even in the ways that we help communities, that we're really taking that critical lens and that we're centering the people who are most impacted in the middle of that conversation and not talking about them, around them, over them, under them, but that they're actually part of the conversation because they are the context experts. And then to this question about fintech, I'm always concerned about technology as the answer. Again, there's no silver bullets. Technology can be part of a series of tools. However, we still live in a society that has a major digital divide, a big digital divide. And I know there's an app for everything, but there are people who still don't have smartphones. There's some research that's been done nationally that shows that, although there's wide adoption of cell phones, right? When you start to look by demographics of people across this country, there are large percentages of people, up to 20% in some cases, of people who do not have smartphones. So we're designing apps that exclude, that by I guess de facto, they exclude people. And we don't mean to, but it's also an opportunity because fintech has influence over the technology industry and can begin to invest in ways to kind of help break some of that down, right? What are some of the approaches that leverage plain text as access to things? What are some approaches that help to invest in more technology infrastructure in communities who are struggling? And I know oftentimes we only think about cities in that context. In urban areas, there are most definitely, but also our rural communities who are struggling, who don't have that same kind of access to high quality internet in their communities. And then the last thing I'll say is, there's a quote that I often use that has been really powerful in my life and in my practice and in everything that I do. Actually, two more things I'm going to say. But this quote that I'm going to share with you is one of my favorites. And before I share it with you, I want to share a passage from, I don't know if folks have seen it yet. I'm going to hold it up. Heather McGhee. The book is called The Sum of Us. And the subtitle is Why Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. And it's really an amazing policy analysis and looks at the decisions that we make on the policy level that are informed by racist ideas that we don't even realize reinforce racism and other forms of oppression, influence which policies people support, and therefore, in many instances throughout our history, actually are harmful to the very people who think that those policies are going to help folks who don't look like them. So said another way, more plainly, is we support policies that we think are going to benefit folks who don't look like us. And what happens is it actually splashes back on white people, on people with resources, maybe not the 1%, but people who are middle class in particular. And so what I wanted to share with you is a couple of pieces. So one thing that really jumped out at me in Heather McGhee's book, which you can see her TED Talk online, it's amazing. Individual racism, whether conscious or unconscious, gives greedy people the moral permission to exploit others in ways they never would with people with whom they empathized. Lenders, brokers, and investors targeted people of color because they thought they could get away with it. Because of racism, they could. Right? So that's the historical context. But the bigger picture is the overall policies in the way that they were constructed are hard for white people to navigate too. Racism brings this added layer of complexity to the conversation that amplifies and makes the experience of people of color and poor people more visceral, right? More impactful because of the ideas associated with it. And it's oftentimes used as a tool to influence people to support policies that are actually not in their own best interest. The policy, I will say explicitly, we could talk about Obamacare slash, oh my goodness, what is of the Affordable Care Act? Sorry, y'all. Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act, right? Obamacare was the stuff that people of color and poor people had, right? The Affordable Care Act was what everybody else had. And it turned out that was the same thing, and people got hustled by the rhetoric.
Yeah.
And to their own detriment. Right. And this is how people play with how our psychology works, with how we've been socialized, and the way that we're wired. And it happens all the time in politics, on TV, movies, all that stuff. So the quote I said I would leave you with is, I'll tell you the quote and I'll tell you where I got it from, and then I'm going to be quiet. So the quote is, most people don't recognize opportunity because it comes disguised as hard work. Most people don't recognize opportunity because it comes disguised as hard work. And in this country, we have major opportunities to advance racial equity, advance social justice in all realms, including our financial system. The question for us is, are we willing to put in the hard work? And who are we really trying to be collectively? Who are we? What is history going to say about us moving forward? Where do we stand on these issues, and how are we going to not conflate fault with responsibility, own our responsibility, and put the work in?
Wow. That's a microphone drop, right? Okay, Renee, I want to put you here.
Yeah, like I want to follow that, but okay. Again, Dr. Martin, I could listen to you preach all day. Are you sure you're not? Let me stop. Anyway, one of the things that I think is extremely important, I want to say thank you to Kathy Mann, my shero, my personal shero, and Sarah. I love the fact that JP Morgan Chase wanted to help with Resilience Fund, right? Like, you stepped up. So that's what needs to happen. There needs to be a step up. We need to hire people of color, more people of color, so that you get the broader discussions, you get the broader input and voices, so that the people who need to be helped are in the room when you're making decisions about how you're going to help. I think it's a combination. I don't think we can liberate the financial system. I think it's a combination. And part of what has to happen is people have to get educated on the history of how the systems came into place. For instance, a great book to read is The Black Tax by Sean Rochester. He does an extraordinary job on showing you what it costs. What is that cost for not including African Americans in financial equity? And then I love this. Mike Lord, I asked, he just retired from State Employees Credit Union of North Carolina. And I asked him their model for being the second largest credit union in the world. And he says, it's real simple, Renee. We only have a few products. We have the same flat rate for everybody. So I know that there are some CEOs cringing right now when I'm going to say this. Maybe we need to offer flat rate products and services across the board. We're people helping people. And imagine if everybody could walk in and get the same rate, a decent low rate, then you're being equitable. That's my opinion. So I'm going to stop there so Sarah can have a chance to give her input as well.
Thank you so much. And I know, Pablo, you're probably counting down the seconds, right? We're close to time. I concur with everything that Renee and Atia, you said. I'm taking notes as a panelist, which is a first, right? Like, where I'm like, oh, I have to follow up on these points with you all. I agree, no silver bullets. If there were, probably would have figured it out by now, given the fact that how fast technology and everything, modernization of the world has gone. I think there needs to be just a shift in both mentality across financial services, from what I like to say transactional experiences to transformational experiences for consumers. So this can hold within the private sector, public sector, nonprofits, I think, alike, and taking a step back to understand, why are we offering this product? How is it being received? And what is it doing for the end consumer or the intermediary that it's been built for? So I think if you take that same analogy, you could shift it to fintech, which I'm also a huge fan of, but also have some skepticism as a potential silver bullet to say, is fintech inclusive? But let's go take it a step further. Is it equitable, right? We talk about inclusion for so long. I propose we drop inclusion and just talk about equity from now on, especially when we're talking about fintech, because it can be a divider as well as an enabler. And so we already talked about the digital divide, which I had on my mind as well. Gender, I saw someone posted, World Bank, of course, that's a huge thing internationally, but in the US, it's rural versus urban, or it's, do you have broadband or not? Or frankly, who designed the product? Was it designed with a lived experience in mind? I've sat in fintech testing in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and I have heard unanimously that many consumers feel, or communities of color feel, that the fintech products are not made for them. Like, those words come out of their mouth. And I think for me, that was an aha moment to take back to our partnerships that are co-creating fintech products for underserved communities. So I think I'll leave it at that, even though I think we could go on for hours on this topic.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, you're right, Sarah. We could go on and on. The depth of the problem, it's immense, really. To my question about replacing the financial system, of course, is not realistic. I do think that we have elements in our system that can be activated or can be strengthened to do this work more effectively. And again, I think that when we talk about minority communities, we do have, at least in our industry, a huge number of minority credit unions. They happen to be small, by the most part. They shouldn't be small. Or maybe we should change the, what we define by small. Small doesn't mean not sustainable necessarily. I think that there's a big opportunity here, not only in terms of, expanding the capacity of these institutions. And Noel Pollo, who's going to be joining us in a few minutes, is going to talk about some of the work that Treasury and this administration are doing to enhance the capacity of those institutions. But I think that we collectively in the credit industry have the elements to be a much bigger response to these challenges the country faces. We are owned by our members, number one, right? And that ownership piece is really important. I think that for anyone, but especially for people who have never owned something, where your life is renting, even renting a TV sometimes, owning is important. And that's something that I saw firsthand with my credit in New York, when people, realize I own this place. And I know it sounds rhetorical, but it's powerful. So the ownership piece is important. I do feel like credit unions can and will be doing more in this space. We have this huge number of CDF5 credit unions, 376 right now. We'll probably get 400 to 400 at the end of the year. But collectively, we have a lot of the footprint in low-income and minority communities that can be and should be supported and activated. So I'm going to leave you with that thought that credit unions are an answer to these problems. We are not there yet, as an industry. We will be there at some point. We have no option but to get to that point, and we have amazing experiences within our network of leaders and credit unions that are doing this work in a way that is just phenomenal. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate it. This been an amazing conversation. Well, you had the conversation. I just listened to you, and I could listen to you all day. And I used to doing that. I live with 3 women at home, so I know exactly what to do. So thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it. Okay, this has been incredible. I'm so inspired, and I hope that all of you are. Clearly there's so much more than we can do. We're doing a lot of that work, and I'm proud of that. And thank you all for your hard work and for your commitment to financial inclusion. we were talking about, well, how do we address some of these issues? And of course, we have now Noel Podio, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community and Economic Development at the U.S. Treasury Department. Noel has been an amazing partner of Inclusiv and of CBFIs and MDIs. He's also been an amazing friend. I've followed his career for many years. He comes from the nonprofit field. He's been instrumental in elevating the profile of organizations that serve the Latino community. So Noel, when you were appointed, we celebrated that appointment. It's a big deal for us as a community. You have a big responsibility, and I know that you've been working extremely hard to make resources available. So thank you for being here with us. And I'm hoping that you can share some of the information that everyone is waiting to hear. You know, what happens with ISEP now?
Pablo, I really appreciate the opportunity. Personally, the opportunity that Inclusiv is creating for just to communicate with the membership here. So thank you very much for the invitation. And I want to get to that, but I want to, was really glad that I got to log in a little bit early and listen to some of the previous discussion. And, I want to step back for 2 seconds and just say, the point that Dr. Martin was making is a fundamental macroeconomic point, right? She articulated it in I think, such a moving way. But I also heard something that we should be hearing in the halls of finance and in the highest levels of economic decision making, which is that the future strength and competitiveness of this economy relies on economic opportunity being broadly available, right? That the things that community development credit unions and low-income credit unions do every day perhaps it is at a scale that we need to that isn't commensurate with its value to the overall economy. That is to say, we need to invest more in it. But if we achieve what Dr. Martin was talking about and what Pablo was talking about, we end up not with some communities doing better, doing something for those people, right? We end up with economic growth at our economy's full potential. We end up with global competitiveness in a time when economic global competitiveness is at an entirely different level. And so these are things that I hope we hear both in our hearts and how they hit us, and in her words, you feel it. But on the other hand, also in a very different perspective, that there's a macroeconomic imperative for this country to deliver on what's been talked about here. So let me get off my philosophizing and get down to the details. I know I'm here for a reason.
No, Noel, but what you said is so true. And I'm glad that you didn't just dive into what you're here to say, because there's a connection here. There's a broader purpose, of what you're doing.
That's exactly right. And it's what motivated me as someone I've spent my career, my life working on capital flow into low-income communities and particularly communities of color, and that's why I took this job. That's why I was so honored to have an opportunity, right? Because I think this really is a solution for our whole country. So I want to first just say congratulations to those institutions, those credit unions that have recently received awards from the CDFI Fund. I was particularly gratified to see the competitiveness of many cooperativas from the island. Oftentimes people will say to me, like, thank you to Treasury for the money. What do you mean thank us? You're the one who put the competitive application together, right? But if you want to thank somebody, thank Congress. They did a good job, huh? So I'm so pleased in a highly competitive environment, which you all know the CDFI Fund dollars are highly competitive. It's so great to see so many of your institutions coming out of this in a positive way. I want to say a word about the Emergency Capital Investment Program. I won't say a whole lot because, as you all know, the application period closed on September 1. We are in the process of underwriting applications, doing that in a fair and consistent way across all the applications. I do want to recognize and just say here publicly how important and how gratified we are for the cooperation of the NCUA. NCUA has worked with us in a really collaborative way, and as the regulator of credit unions, this would have been a lot harder if we had not had such strong collaboration. And I just want to recognize that publicly. And we are expecting and we've said this publicly throughout, that it would take us, sort of 90 to 120 days to get through the underwriting process, because this, the way that the statute sort of makes the money available, we really do need to sort of underwrite every application before we make a set of announcements. And so, we've got to get through that work. And so that probably puts us in something on the order of early December. And we want to then be able to move from announcements to rapidly closing on investments with those institutions in which we're able to make investments. And so I am very excited about this process. Again, we have a statute that really allows us to do something extraordinary. And so we've worked very hard to create a capital structure within the already, just outstanding sort of structure that the statute gives us, but a capital structure that will be most useful to the institutions in accordance with their institution type and regulatory structures. And so you should expect here for it to take a little bit longer for us. And looking forward to those announcements towards the end of the year. But I'll end by saying, and happy to have some conversation, what have you, but I'll end by saying that this is a truly transformational moment, right? And I hope that you are thinking about your institution in a different way in terms of growth. I think for many of us in the community development field, whether leading a credit union or an affordable housing organization or, pick your organization, right? There has been this sort of a situation in which there are constrained resources. And so, we need to think about growth, maybe 10% a year. Maybe we can do a little bit more than last year. This is a moment where we are going to have to step up collectively, whatever role we're in, to something that we have not done in decades or perhaps ever in this country. And that's to grow the community development sector by factors of 5 and 10. And if institutions are smaller, maybe that's 100, but thinking in those sorts of ways, because the challenge in front of us, I began by mentioning that sort of macroeconomic framing. That's the challenge, is to move that needle. And as important as it is to move needles in our communities that require investments that may be small, that may take a lot of work, that aggregating that, scaling that will change the bigger macroeconomic picture, right? But that will require a tremendous scaling of your work. And so I hope you are thinking in an entirely different way as you look at the resources that could come out of ESIP, out of the CDFI fund, and of course, keeping an eye on the Build Back Better agenda, which is moving through Congress. This is all just potentially such a transformational moment for our country and our economy and so many of our communities. And so, Pablo, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm happy to stay and engage, but want to let you run our clock. And thanks just very much to Inclusiv for inviting me here. Credit unions are such a critical part of this community development infrastructure we have in this country, and we're looking forward to the ongoing investment.
Thank you, Noel. And we do have a few more minutes. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. One of them, there were concerns initially about the capacity of the CDFI field to absorb $9 billion in investments. Were we able to demonstrate that we have the capacity to absorb did you have enough applications? Did you get enough applications to absorb $9 billion?
So I want to answer this in two ways. One, in the specific way, you will be seeing information on application demand very soon. And so I don't want to get ahead of a public announcement. All I will say is I had faith in this industry and this industry delivered. And then what I will also say is there has always been hand wringing about the capacity of a community development sector. And this goes well beyond credit unions, except a lack of recognition that capital is the constraining factor. Because if we look at how CDFIs and many other community development institutions respond to moments of being over-capitalized or getting more money than, boy, we're not so sure they can manage it, extraordinary things happen. And so I think that our capacity analysis needs to take into account that capital is the primary fundamental limiting factor in capacity. And that's not to say that we shouldn't look hard in the mirror about how do we grow our staff? How do we improve our procedures? We need to look at those things even harder in the mirror. But the idea that that's what's the limiting factor, look what happened with PPP. CDFIs couldn't possibly move $1 billion in PPP. The numbers were exponentially larger than that. So two answers to the same question.
No, and that's great. I'm happy that you feel that way, because I think that that's an important myth that has been addressed, that the system doesn't have that capacity. If we go back to the Community Development Capital Initiative program that Treasury rolled out many years ago, what we saw was the exponential impact of capital when it comes to institutions that are deep in the community. So we saw, like, from credit unions, we got around 70 million in secondary capital investments, and that translated into more than 2 billion in loans in those communities. So I can wait to see what type of impact these billions of dollars will have in low income and minority communities. So this is phenomenal. I want to thank you and your team, because I know that it's been difficult, and sometimes we've been critical, but just understand, Noel, that we want you to succeed. We want this program to be, a model for the future, because you're right. This should not be a one-time solution, and hopefully we will have more opportunities to continue to inject capital into institutions that are really serving minority and low-income communities. So thank you. Really appreciate your leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. And let me just say that, look, critique and criticism and bruises and bumps, that's part of the process, right? And if we here at Treasury and in the federal government can't take a little bit of feedback, boy, we need to hang it up and go home. And so I really encourage the institutions out there to communicate with us, to push us when we need to be pushed. That is a part of this big democratic process. And thank you for playing your role. And I'll just assure you that our team is doing everything we can to play our role. And to the point of capital that you raised, certainly the amount of capital matters, but I hope what really unlocks is the character of the capital. I hope that these investments are investments that absolutely transform institutions, because very well that that regular debt's a wonderful thing, but can only carry us so far. But depending on the institutions, the secondary capital or equity, tier one capital, depending on which institution that would come out of ESIT, I think this can be just tremendously transformative. And we are, like you said, Pablo, if we take the numbers that you just quoted and scale those into the billions, wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be incredible. And hopefully, again, prove that this can be done, and it will get done. We are totally, we have faith that our institutions, our members are going to be making the impact that they have been making in communities, and with more capital, more impact. It's just that simple. So Again, Noel, really thank you for your participation. I know that you've been, playing with your schedule all day just to be able to participate. Really appreciate you being part of this conversation. And again, in anything that we can be helpful, please count on us. We're a partner here, and we hope to see more opportunities coming down the pipeline. Jody Harris actually mentioned earlier today that there are a number of potential opportunities for CDFIs coming down, through the different bills being explored right now. So we're looking at the CDF5 certification as being a ticket for many other opportunities, potentially in the short and long term as well. So thank you again for your leadership and support.
It's my honor and my pleasure to be with you all today, and saludos a todos.
Saludos. Muchas gracias. Adiós. Okay, so we are on time, I think. We are moving along. So again, thank you to Noel Podio. He's been an amazing ally and partner in this process. And I know that for those of you who went through the ISE program, it wasn't easy. It was very challenging, but you should know that you're making history. You should know that, when you get these investments, things are going to change dramatically for your institution and, more importantly, for the communities you serve. So we are so happy that this has become a reality with all the challenges that you've gone through, with all the advice and support that we were able to provide. We're hoping that we were able to move the needle. I want to give our capital team, Kathy Kim especially, a big shout out, because they were working around the clock just to make sure that we were able to provide some support. The same with our CDF5 team, providing the lending reports and all that to you guys. It's a collective effort, and we are proud of what the Inclusiv team has been able to do. We're proud of what you have been able to do. And with that, I'm going to just move on to some quick notes. We have we have a general session coming up at 4 o'clock. We also have 4 networking sessions that start at 5:30 Eastern time. So please just figure out which one you can attend. You can actually go to more than one session. You can choose to go to one or drop in all of them. If you want, if you actually do that, you'll be able to access the recordings that we're going to make available on October 11. You can also access those recordings and all the sessions recording at the Inclusiv CU network on YouTube. And also, just remember to use your hashtag CDCU CON 2021 to keep track of what's going on in the conference and to voice your opinions and to connect with each other. So thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Remember, we have another session coming up, and then the networking. Get your glass of wine for that. All right. Thank you so much.